Television station for Southern California. From the Los Angeles Unified School District, this is KLCS, Channel 58 in Los Angeles.
Welcome to Lesson 40 on Design for Driving. Our lesson today will deal with car emergencies. Now, these are situations that do happen very fast. Normally, if you are maintaining your car and servicing your car properly, you will never encounter these car emergencies. But occasionally, all of a sudden, out of the clear blue sky, these things can happen to you, and you must be ready to deal with them. We will be talking about 5 typical emergencies that happen out on the road today, and we'll tell you about causes so that you can be aware of the things that might cause these emergencies, and we'll be talking about the proper responses in these emergencies. So let's take a look first at tire blowouts. Howard?
Okay, Linda, thank you. Tire blowouts are one of the more serious types of emergencies that can arise. There are a number of different causes. We could, for example, have a nail in the tire. We could have just purchased a new set of tires. For example, maybe we're using tubeless tires on a car which we previously used tube-type tires. Maybe we did not change rims, and perhaps we have a slight rim leak. We could, of course, have a worn tire. And it's very, very possible, even with a brand new set of tires, that you can have a blowout. Maybe they're overinflated. Maybe they are underinflated, and perhaps you hit some sort of a sharp object, which of course would cause the blowout. Now, the causes are innumerable, and we could probably come up with many, many more causes. But let's take a look at some of the responses. There is definitely a difference in your response for a front wheel blowout and a rear wheel blowout. So we'll start with the front wheel blowout, which is probably the more serious at moderate speeds. And one of the questions that normally comes up is, why is a front wheel blowout probably more dangerous than a rear wheel blowout? Well, front wheel blowouts are, for one thing, you encounter a loss of directional control. That is, the directional control of your vehicle is normally through the front wheels. And if you have a blowout through the front wheel, you can definitely have a loss of directional control. So let's see what happens. We're driving along, and we have a blowout to the right front tire, a complete blowout. Not a slow leak, not just a drop in pressure, but a blowout. Maybe the sidewall blows out. Immediately, what is going to happen is the car is going to start to pull to the right. What is the proper response? Well, the proper response actually is 3 particular segments. First of all, what you do is you hold the wheels, you hold the steering wheel steady and steer as straight as you can. Secondly, of course, you do not jump on the brakes, but you apply the brakes in a slow and steady manner. And thirdly, after you have initial control of the vehicle, you try to steer somewhat to the left. Now, again, holding the steering wheel steady and straight is not always the easiest thing, because there is this tremendous drag that you'll get to the right. But it is very, very important that you regain control as quickly as possible, but doing it without losing your cool. You've got to be very, very cool when this happens. You can't become panicked. Remember, directional control is normally to the front wheels. Now, let's take a look at what happens if we have a rear wheel blowout. The causes, again, are basically the same. We could have run over a nail, a large nail, and perhaps after driving for maybe a few miles, we have a blowout. Let's say it's left rear. what would the proper response be? Well, as soon as the blowout occurs, your car is going to start dragging most likely to the left. If you jump on the brakes immediately, what you could get is fishtailing. And remember, fishtailing is the constant swinging from side to side. If you jump on the brakes too hard, you could go into a donut, which is start going to the rotational movement. That is, where you start going round and round. You could throw the vehicle around so that you are going back in the face of oncoming traffic, which is something you don't want to do. So the first thing you do, of course, is to hold the wheels straight and steady again. You do not jump on the brakes, but rather you apply the brakes slowly and with very, very steady pressure. And third thing, of course, is you try to steer away from the direction in which the car is skidding. That is, you try to hold it straight, but make your correction in a very, very easy manner. So again, we have the front tire blowout and the rear tire blowout. Causes are many. Basically, the responses are the same, but remember, probably the worst place to have a blowout under most conditions is in the front. Now again, we're just talking about on dry pavement. If we were on wet pavement, then our responses would be somewhat different, and in that we would probably steer into the direction of the skid and perhaps even slightly accelerate.
Now let's take a look at a piece of film that will show us how to handle a tire blowout.
Here's another emergency that can happen without warning. Tire failure. Before touching the brake, the driver grips the steering wheel firmly. Then he brakes gently. Locking the wheels could cause him to lose control. He continues slowing so he can steer off the road safely. With no room on the right, this driver identifies the parking lot on the left, where he can get completely off the roadway. If this safe area were not there, he would have continued on until he could get off the road, even though it might ruin his tire.
You'll notice that the driver held the wheel straight, applied the brakes slowly and steadily, and then finally pulled off the road, in this case to the left, to a safe area where the tire could be changed. So remember, you do want to follow those three basic procedures. Now, Linda, can you tell us about another car emergency?
Okay, let's talk a little about brake failure and how to handle that. First of all, what would be the causes of brake failure? Well, number one, if you're going down a hill and you're going down the hill and you're using your brakes quite a bit instead of using a lower gear, you can overheat your brakes easily, and this is one cause of brake failure. If you're going through a lot of puddles in your driving and your brakes happen to get wet, or a lot of rain, a lot of wetness, and your brakes get wet, of course this would be another cause of brake failure, wet brakes. Another cause would be if you lose your brake fluid. All of a sudden you're going to lose your braking action also. So these are possible causes of brake failure. Now let's take a situation, maybe you are going downhill and you've got a cement truck in front of you up ahead that is stopped for some reason, and you know you're going to have to stop. You put your foot on the brakes. What are you going to do? Let's see how to handle that. Okay, first of all, first thing you want to do is to pump your brakes very fast and very hard. Pump your brakes first, okay? For this, if you've got power brakes, you will only have about 3 pumps available. In other brakes, you can keep pumping them. Maybe you'll bring up some extra reserve brake fluid there that will help you. If this does not work, just pumping your brakes real hard will not do it. Then you need to shift to a lower gear. Your objective, remember, is to slow down your speed. Shifting to a lower gear will help your engine to slow down. Okay, so that's your second procedure. The third thing you want to do, in case none of these work so far, is to apply your emergency brake. Now, it may be a hand brake, as you see here on your left. It may be a hand brake to your right in the middle between the passenger and the driver's seat. It may be a foot brake that you'll have to use your left foot to press down on. But then you would want to use your emergency brake. That's the idea behind it. That's why it's there, to help you in cases like this and brake failure. Now you've done all of these three things. Your last alternative, if your car still has not slowed down, try rubbing up against the curb, or if you have to, running into something soft like bushes or hedges of some sort to help again reduce your speed. That's the idea on brake failure. You've got to do something to slow your car down, to bring it to a stop, to see what you can do about your brakes. So these are the four things you need to do. Pump your brakes real hard and real fast. Shift to a lower gear. Apply your emergency brake, and then if you need to, rub up against the curb or run into something soft, some bushes or hedges, if you can. Now let's take a look at a piece of film and see how to handle brake failure.
This driver wants to control his speed by braking, but no brakes. He attempts to regain pressure by rapid pumping. It doesn't help, and speed is increasing. He shifts to a lower gear. Then, holding the release lever to avoid locking the wheels, he begins using the parking brake. And just in case he needs it, he looks for a way out. If he'd been unable to stop where he did, this driver could have driven into the bushes on the right. When brakes fail, your objective is to use up the momentum of your car to bring it to a stop. Bushes, hedges, snowbanks, each can offer a good way out.
Okay, you can see in this situation you have to really keep a clear head and not panic. Again, look around for something that is soft that you could run into, nothing hard or nothing that'll do a lot of damage to your car if possible. So again, you want to use up the speed, slow yourself down, and you can't use your brakes, so try that emergency brake, shifting to a lower gear, and of course pumping your brakes first of all. Maybe that'll do something for them. Okay, what's another emergency, Howard?
All right, another car emergency would be when your hood flies open. Now this is something that is not as common perhaps today as it was years ago, because oftentimes today on cars we're seeing the reverse hood. That is, instead of the hood opening towards the windshield, the hood opens away from the windshield. If you have a reverse type of hood, you are going to find that the chances of the hood really flying open are very, very greatly diminished. But let us assume that you are driving a car that has a forward hood, that is, where the hood opens towards the windshield. You're driving along, let's say on the freeway, and in the middle of the day, and the hood all of a sudden flies open. Now, what would be the cause? Well, there are many reasons. First of all, maybe you were working on your car. You had perhaps drained the oil and you put in new oil, and when you put the hood down, you did not latch it. Or perhaps the car was taken to a mechanic, and when you picked it up at the shop, you didn't bother to check to see if the hood was all the way down and locked. So you're driving along and the hood flies open. What would be the proper response? Well, first of all, you don't want to panic. Remember, you don't panic. The first thing you really do is you bend down and you look through the crack that exists between the hood and the body of the car, of course, viewing out of the windshield. You do that, you pump your brakes in order to activate the brake lights, therefore warning drivers behind you that you're slowing down, and then, of course, you pull off the road. Now, if you're close to the right-hand lane or to the parking lane, of course, this does lend itself a greater advantage. On the other hand, if you are in the middle of the roadway, you've got to be very, very careful that when you pump your brakes, that you check your mirrors very, very carefully in order that if you decide to pull over, that you do not interrupt the flow of oncoming traffic from behind you, and yet still watch the road ahead. Now, the procedure that is used in the evening hours is basically the same, but then again, remember that your vision is greatly restricted. Restricted, one, by your own headlights, and of course also by the cars coming towards you and headlights in your eyes. So you're driving along in the evening hours, the hood flies up, you look down through the crack between the hood and the body, and you find that you are unable to see. What do? You don't panic. Immediately what you do is you put your head outside the window on the driver's side, you flash the brakes or pump the brakes in order to, so the brake lights flash to the rear, warning other drivers that you're slowing down, and again, pull off the road so that, and completely off the road, so that drivers coming from behind do not have to swerve to avoid you, or perhaps do not become involved in an accident with you. Now, let's take the same situation again in the evening, and you're driving along, the hood flies up, and you look down between the crack, between the hood and the rest of the body, and you are able to see what is the procedure there, or the response. The response is basically the same as the day. That is, you get that clear view ahead, you pump the brakes so that the brake lights flash to the rear, and then finally you pull off the road. Again, if you are not in the right-hand lane next to the curb or a soft or depressed area of the road surface, what you have to do is make certain that the road coming from the rear is clear so that you do not interrupt the flow of oncoming traffic. Now, let's take a look at a piece of film and see how a driver handles this type of emergency with the hood flying up. You can see how your visibility was obstructed. As soon as the hood went up, you lost total visibility. What did the driver in the film do? The first thing he did, of course, was to bend over, looking between the crack in the hood and the body of the car. He then pumped his brakes in order to activate the brake lights to warn drivers that are coming or approaching from the rear that he was having difficulty, and slowly pulled off to the side of the road. Again, you don't panic. That's the worst thing you can possibly do. So the three basic procedures again are: one, when the hood flies up, look down between the hood and the body. Secondly is pump your brakes so that you flash your lights from behind. And third is pull off to the side of the road and get completely off the surface so that you're not interfering with the flow of oncoming traffic. Now, Linda, can you tell us about another car emergency?
Right. Another car emergency that really doesn't happen too often, but you do need to be ready for it, is a stuck accelerator pedal. Now, we are seeing it more with the women's higher heels. When they drive with these higher heels, occasionally they get their heel under the accelerator pedal in a certain way, and they push down, and they get the accelerator pedal caught up underneath the heel of their shoe. So, ladies, you have to really watch out for this. Now, what do you do in case your accelerator pedal sticks? Well, sometimes you'll hear people say shift to a lower gear to slow your car down, but that's not going to help you. Your accelerator pedal is stuck and you're still going to be traveling along. This will not help actually bring your car to a stop. The idea is that you want to reduce your speed in order to get yourself over to the right so that you can turn your car completely off. Now, when you're driving down the road, actually your very best response is to turn the ignition off. But remember, you have several positions on that ignition switch. When you reach that lock position, remember you will actually be locking the steering wheel, and you can see the lock position here on the ignition switch. If you turn your key all the way to the lock position, then you will have to be very careful in what you do, because you will not have any steering there at all. So this is why when you turn that key, do not turn it all the way to the lock position. You just turn it off one click, and then this way you will still be able to steer. Now, in a car with power steering, you will lose a lot of that. You will be able to turn the wheel just a little, and that'll be enough to get you off of the road. But you won't be able to turn around a corner. You won't have that much steering with a car with power steering. Once you actually turn your ignition off also, you will lose some of your power brakes too. Again, you'll be able to pump them about 3 times with a power brake, but that's about it. But again, that's enough to help get you off of the road, over to the right or over to the left if you're on the freeway. Now, with a stuck accelerator pedal again, you want to turn off the ignition. Of course, you would want to warn other people, and you have your emergency flashers on your car, so once you get that steering control, try and reach over and turn on your emergency flashers. They're generally located very close to you, so you can do that. And then try and pull yourself over to the right of the road, or if you're on the freeway and it happens in the left lane, you may have to pull over to the left in that median, in the middle. Again, this is not something that really happens all that often. It does tend to happen more back east, where they get a lot of snow and slush on the road, or up in the mountains where you'll get a buildup of it underneath your accelerator pedal, up underneath the car, and occasionally the accelerator pedal will stick then. But again, if you're wearing these high heels, be very careful. I often recommend to my students carry another pair of shoes when you're driving in the car, a pair of sandals or anything, so that this won't happen to you, that you get your heel caught up underneath that accelerator pedal. Or it also happens with the brake pedal too. But if this should happen, again, you want to turn off your ignition, be very careful with the car, with power steering and power brakes, though. Do not turn the ignition all the way to the lock position. Turn on your emergency flashers to warn other people so that they know you've got a problem with your car. And this will help everybody else to look out for you. And then try and pull yourself off to the right, or again, if you're on the freeway, pull yourself into that center lane in the middle. Okay, so that's how you handle a stuck accelerator pedal. Now, Howard, what are some other types of emergencies that might happen to us out on the road?
Well, Linda, one of the most dangerous things I think that can happen is having a fire in your automobile. Now, there's two different causes that we look at for a fire. It could be the cause of the driver. That is, for example, maybe the driver was smoking and dropped a cigarette, inadvertently, didn't know it, on the rubber mat on the floor, and the cigarette rolled back to the carpeted area and starts a fire. Or it could be that the cigarette ash is blown into the back seat, for example, and we have a fire starting in the back seat. Also, we could have somebody who flips a cigarette into our car, whether the car is parked or whether it's in motion. But probably the most common cause of fires in vehicles are where we have a fire under the hood. And these are the types of fires that require immediate action. And, of course, both of them would, but perhaps it would present a greater problem because, again, our visibility is obstructed. Well, let's take a look at some of the things that we might use in order to help control a fire in a car. We're driving along and we have a fire under the hood. But what is our initial response? Well, sometimes it's panic. Remember, again, you don't want to panic. Keep your cool. Pull your car slowly to the right side of the roadway if you can, of course being very careful of traffic approaching from the rear. Also, you want to be certain that you can see the road ahead. If you do not have clear visibility of the road ahead, you can stick your head out of the window. Now, what are some typical ways of handling fires? Well, one of the typical ways would be by using a box of baking soda. Now, baking soda is an excellent form. It immediately removes the oxygen from the fire, and of course, it's a nice way of getting the fire out. On the other hand, you want to be certain that when you are using this baking soda, that you don't burn yourself. Now, that also brings about another problem. Do you open the hood immediately? If you open the hood immediately, you're giving more oxygen and have a greater chance for a larger flame. So what you might do is you have two options. You can open the hood immediately, throw the baking soda onto the fire, and perhaps get it out. Or you might want to starve the fire for a moment, and that is leaving the hood down. Of course, you're going to warp the paint. You may even warp the hood by leaving it down, but then again, it depends on what you want to do. Whatever you do, don't open the hood, then run back to the passenger compartment for something such as baking soda. Take the baking soda with you in the beginning. Another form of correction might be the use of a fire extinguisher. And I personally believe, and many driver education teachers do, as well as your parents probably would agree, that carrying a fire extinguisher in an automobile is one of the best things you can do. You can mount it on the firewall, you can have it mounted behind the front seat, you can even have it mounted next to you, right next to the door. Another form of corrective action would be to grab a blanket from inside the car, open the hood, and quell the fire immediately. So we have three basic forms of correction. All of them are relatively inexpensive to handle. One, of course, would be the baking soda. Secondly, we would have the use of the fire extinguisher. And third, a blanket. Now, let's take a look at a film and see how a driver handles a fire under his hood. Okay? Here we go.
The car ahead is on fire. The driver is alert to pull over quickly and turn his engine off. Notice that the driver stopping to help has a fire extinguisher.
If you see flames coming from your car rather than smoke, you may have a gasoline fire, and this is extremely dangerous. So the best thing to do would be immediately notify the fire department. Do not try to control something like this yourself, but rather let somebody who is trained do it for you. Now, Linda, maybe you'd like to sort of tie everything together for us, and we can see what we've talked about.
In handling car emergencies, the main thing is, you've heard us say a lot of it, is don't panic, and most people do. It's a natural human reaction. But one of the things you need to think about first is your steering control. Then you want to get your speed control, and of course you want to then try and pull yourself off of the roadway over to the right as much as you can. If you're on the freeway though, and you're in the left lane, far left lane, try and get yourself into that median in the middle. But again, try to remain cool and calm and get steering control, try and get speed control, and then pull yourself off of the roadway and handle the situation however you need to. If it's to latch your hood or to find out what's making your accelerator pedal stick or whatever. Okay, Howard, what's our activity for this lesson?
All right, Linda. In our activity for this lesson, we would like you to list 5 typical car emergencies and explain the best response for each one. List 5 typical car emergencies and explain the best response for each one. Well, it's really been an interesting lesson, and these are some things that were covered in this particular lesson that oftentimes we don't really recognize, at least not on first sight. So consider each of these things and drive safely. Okay, well, we'll be looking forward to seeing you in our next lesson. Bye.
Bye.
Get in. Every day, more and more people call Color Time, America's largest rent-to-own system, because one call can bring immediate delivery of name-brand televisions, video cassette recorders, stereo systems, and appliances. Name brands without long-term obligation, financing hassles, or extra service and repair charges. Call Color Time for what you want now with no hang-up.